Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. In this video, I'm going to show you the process of reverting the firmware on a PS4. Unlike the previous revert method, this time we'll be using the legitimate Core OS patch method. I'll walk you through the entire process in detail, including an explanation of the differences and advantages of this method compared to the Core OS slot switching method. Alright, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, before we get into the revert process, let me first give you a quick explanation of how this method compares to the one I used in my previous revert video. The main difference lies in how we patch the NOR chip backup. In the Core OS slot switching method, you have to guess the switch pattern to revert the firmware version back to an earlier one. But with the legitimate Core OS patch method, you don't need to do any of that. However, there is one additional step required during the NOR chip backup process. Now, in terms of time, the Core OS slot switching method can be faster, but only if you happen to guess the correct switch pattern on your first try. If not, you'll have to repatch the NOR backup with a different pattern and flash it again to the NOR chip, which can be really time-consuming. This is especially true if you're using a Teensy++ 2.0, where the flashing process alone can take more than 10 minutes. Imagine having to repeat that process multiple times. In fact, in my previous video, I only succeeded on the 8th switch pattern, so you can imagine how long the revert process took. On the other hand, with the legitimate Core OS patch method, you don't need to flash the NOR chip over and over again because there's no guessing involved. Even though there's one extra step in this method, overall it saves you a lot of time and effort. Alright, now that everything's clear, let's jump straight into the firmware revert process. Alright, as you can see here, we have a PlayStation 4 Fat. According to the owner, the currently installed firmware version is 12.00, and I've already confirmed that. It is indeed version 12.00. I also asked what the firmware version was before the update, and they said it was version 11.00. So in this video, we'll try reverting it back to version 11.00. Here's a little trick I want to share in case you don't know what the previous firmware version was before the update. This method is about 90% accurate. Go to the System menu and look for Error History. In this case, the system language is set to Indonesian. This menu keeps a log of errors that occurred while the PS4 was running. If you open one of the error logs, you'll find the firmware version that was running when the error occurred. For example, this error happened on firmware 12.00. So what you want to do is scroll through the list and look for any error log that shows a different firmware version than the one currently installed. Obviously, it should be a lower version. Let's scroll down, since the logs are ordered from newest to oldest. And here it is, an error from firmware 11.00. Now let's scroll back up to confirm the change. Yup, right above it is a log from version 12.00. So we can conclude that the system was indeed updated from firmware 11.00 to 12.00, just as the owner mentioned. That's how you can roughly determine the previous firmware version before an update. While it's not a guaranteed method, it's pretty reliable, around 90% accurate. Okay, now let's move on to the revert process. The first step is to dump the NOR and Syscon chip data. For that, we'll need to open up the PS4, because we have to solder jumper wires from the Teensy to the NOR and Syscon chips. Let's start by removing the top cover. Since this is a PS4 Fat, we also need to take the motherboard out of the case because the soldering points are located on both sides of the board. Before we remove the EMI shield, we need to take off the bottom case cover. Next, let's remove the power supply, then unplug all connectors from the motherboard. Now we can remove the bottom EMI shield, but first, we'll need to unscrew everything holding it in place. Alright, the motherboard is now out of the case. Next, we'll solder jumper wires to the NOR and Syscon chip points. But before that, we need to lift the VDD leg on the Syscon chip so we can dump its data and also enable debug mode. Okay, that's done. Now we'll solder all the wires to the correct solder points based on the PS4's motherboard model. You can see the solder points for each motherboard version in this video by Modded Warfare. Unfortunately, I didn't get to record the soldering process, so here's how it looks after all the wires have been connected. Now we're ready to dump the NOR and Syscon data. We'll start with the Syscon. Since I'm not using a switch, I'm just using a simple plug like this to connect to the Teensy. The Teensy is now connected, so let's begin the dumping process. We'll switch over to the computer to continue. First, let's download the firmware Revert tools. For the Syscon chip, we'll be using an app called Syscon Tools. I'm using version 2.2.0 here because the latest version doesn't work on my computer. For dumping and patching the NOR chip, we'll be using WeTools. I'll be using the free version in this tutorial, but if you have the budget, feel free to get the paid version for more features. Okay, I've already downloaded both files, so let's extract them. For Syscon Tools version 2.2.0, you'll need to install it first. I've already installed it on my PC. Before we start dumping, let's prepare a folder to organize the dump files. I'll create a main folder called Revert. And inside it, we'll make a few subfolders. First, create a folder named Syscon for the Syscon dump. Then create two folders for the NOR dump, NOR 001 and NOR 002. If you're wondering why we need two NOR folders, I'll explain that later during the Revert process. Lastly, create another folder called Legit. You'll understand its purpose later in the tutorial. Now, copy the WeTools application into the Revert folder. We'll use this later to dump NOR files and patch Syscon and NOR files too. Alright, we're done with the setup. Now let's move on to dumping the Syscon. First, we need to program the Teensy so it can dump the Syscon chip. Open the Teensy Loader app located in Syscon Tools, HW, Loader. Then go to the HW, Teensy++ 2.0 folder and drag the PS4 Syscon tool flasher.hex file into the loader window. Click Auto, then press the Program button on the Teensy to flash it. Once it's done, the Teensy is ready to be used with the Syscon chip. Next, launch the PS4 Syscon Tools application. Before we dump the Syscon data, we first need to enable debug mode on the Syscon chip. In the Syscon process section, select Enable Syscon Debug Mode, then click Start. Done. Now we can proceed to dump the Syscon data. In Syscon process, choose Dump Full Syscon Flash. Then in the Input/Output file field, select the Syscon folder we created earlier and give the file a name, for example. I'll call it Syscon. Set the number of dumps to 2, so the app will perform 2 dumps for verification. Finally, click Start to begin the process. Let's wait for it to finish. Okay, the dump is complete. If you see the message files are identical, that means both dumps are identical and the process was successful. If it says files are not identical, you'll need to redo the dump process. Now, let's patch the Syscon dump file. Close Syscon Tools, then go back to the Revert folder. Open the Syscon folder, and you'll see the 2 dump files we just created. Next, go back to Revert folder and run the PS4 WeTools application. If a warning window appears, just click More Info and then run anyway. In the tool, press 1, then Enter to open the file browser. Press 4 to open the Syscon folder. You should now see the 2 dump files. You can do a manual comparison to make sure both files are identical by pressing C, then Enter. If it says OK, that means the files match. Press Enter to go back to the previous menu, then press 4 again to return to the Syscon folder. Now we're going to patch one of the Syscon dump files. Let's pick Syscon 01. Press 1 to select it. You'll see the status says Probably Patchable, which means our PS4 Fat has a good chance of being reverted. Next, press 3 to begin patching. The tool recommends using Method A, so press 1 to select it. The patching process is now complete. If you go back to the Syscon folder, you'll see a new file called Syscon Patch A. This is the file we'll flash back to the Syscon chip later. Alright, next we're going to dump the NOR chip data. Just like with the Syscon chip, we need to program the Teensy so it can interface with the NOR chip. To do that, open the Teensy Loader application again. This time, the flasher file we're going to use is located in PS4 Wii Tools, Assets, HW, Spyway. Drag that hex file into the loader window, click Auto, then press the Program button on the Teensy. Alright, done. The Teensy is now ready to dump the NOR chip using the PS4 Wii Tools app. Go ahead and launch PS4 Wii Tools. Then select option 3, which is S/Flash Read Write Spyway. Next, press 1. You'll see the NOR chip specs being detected here. To start the dump process, press 1 again to choose Read All, then hit Enter. Let's wait for the dump to finish. Just like with the Syscon chip, we'll need to perform a second dump to verify the results. Press 1 and enter again to do a second dump. Wait until the process completes. Now let's check the dumped NOR files. They're saved in the same directory where the PS4 Wii Tools app is located, in this case, the Revert folder. Since the app doesn't allow us to choose a custom save location, let's move the dumped files into the NOR 001 folder. Make sure you place them in that specific folder. Next, we'll compare the two NOR dumps to verify that they are identical. Okay, the results are identical. If your dumps are not identical, do a third dump and keep repeating until you get at least 2 matching files. You can delete the ones that don't match. Now, we move on to the next step, and this is where the legitimate Core OS patch method differs from the Core OS slot switching method. In this step, we don't need to guess any switch patterns. Instead, we're going to reinstall the same firmware version that's already on the PS4. In our case, that's firmware version 12.00. Keep in mind that we'll be using the recovery firmware, not the retail one. Let's go ahead and download the recovery version of firmware 12.00. I've already downloaded it, so now we'll copy it to a flash drive. Create a folder called PS4, and inside that, create another folder named Update. Make sure both folder names are in all caps. Then place the update file inside. The file must be named exactly PS4 update.pup. Now we're ready to reinstall the firmware on the PS4. Since the PS4 is still disassembled, we'll need to reinstall the motherboard into the case so the system can power on. Alright, the PS4 is reassembled and ready to boot up. To reinstall the firmware, we need to start the PS4 in safe mode, because you can't reinstall the same firmware version through the regular system software update menu. Before powering it on, make sure the Teensy is disconnected. Otherwise, the PS4 won't boot. To enter safe mode, press and hold the power button until you hear the second beep, then release it. The second beep usually comes after about 7 seconds. If you did it correctly, you'll see a message asking you to connect a controller via USB. Plug it in and press the PS button. You should now see the Safe Mode menu. Plug in the flash drive that contains the firmware update. Then select option 3, Update System Software. Next, choose option 1, Update from USB storage device. Then hit OK. The system will detect the firmware version on the flash drive. Make sure it matches the currently installed version. If everything looks good, click Next. Wait for the copying process to finish. Then click Update to begin the firmware reinstallation. Wait until the PS4 restarts and boots up normally. Once it does, shut the PS4 down. We'll now perform a second NOR dump. Reconnect the Syscon chip back to the PS4 motherboard. Now launch PS4 Wii Tools again. We don't need to reprogram the Teensy this time since it's still loaded with the SPIWay flasher. Choose option 3, S/Flash Read Write Spyway, then press 1. Press 1 again to start dumping the NOR chip. Once the first dump is complete, repeat the process to perform a second dump just like before. Press 1 and wait for it to finish. Now, before we compare the dumps, let's go back to the Revert folder and move these two new NOR dump files into the NOR 002 folder. This is exactly why we created two separate folders for NOR dumps. Back in PS4 Wii Tools, select Option 1, File Browser, then press 3 to navigate to the NOR 002 folder. Press C to compare the files. If they're identical, you're good to go. If not, keep dumping until you get two identical files. Now for the next step, we're going to apply the legitimate core OS patch to both NOR dump files from NOR 001 and NOR 002. Start by copying the NOR file from NOR 001 to the legit folder. And rename it to NOR 001. Do the same with the file from NOR 002, renaming it to NOR 002. If you haven't done so already, launch PS4 Wii Tools. Choose Option 1, File Browser, then press 1 to enter the legit folder. Select the NOR 001 file by pressing 1. Next, choose Option 5, Legitimate Core OS Patch. You'll be prompted to select the second NOR dump. Press Y, then Enter. Choose NOR 002 by pressing 2. The legitimate patch process is now complete. If you check the legit folder, you'll see a new file named NOR 001 Legit Patch. Back in PS4 Wii Tools, you'll be asked whether you want to flash this patched file to the NOR chip. Press Y, then Enter. Press 1, then select 0 to begin the flashing process. If you had already closed PS4 Wii Tools after the patching step, you can still flash manually. Relaunch PS4 Wii Tools, choose 1, File Browser, then enter the legit folder and select the patched file by pressing 2. Press F, then Enter, followed by 1, and finally choose Option 4, Write All to start flashing. Wait until the process completes. You should see the message All Done. This means the NOR chip has been successfully flashed. If you get an error, or if the app crashes mid-process, the flash might have failed and you'll need to retry. Now that the NOR chip is done, we'll flash the patched Syscon file we created earlier. First, we need to reprogram the Teensy for Syscon communication. Open the Teensy loader, drag in the sysconflasher.hex file for Teensy++ 2.0, click Auto, and press the Program button. Next, open PS4 Syscon Tools. Under Syscon Process, choose Write Syscon NVSS only. In the Input/Output field, select the Syscon Patch A file. Click Start to begin flashing the Syscon chip. Wait for the flash to complete. Once it's done, disconnect the Teensy from the motherboard. Now let's power on the PS4 and see the result. You can start the PS4 normally or through safe mode. Here, I'll use safe mode again. Just like before, press and hold the power button until you hear the second beep, then release. If your PS4 won't boot, reflash the Syscon using the Write Full method. In the options, check Enable Advanced option. Then, in the Syscon process, select Write Full Syscon Flash. Once the flashing is complete, try turning your PS4 back on. Choose Option 3, Update System Software, then Option 1, Update from USB Storage Device. If the revert was successful, you'll now see a message prompting you to install firmware version 11.00 or any version lower than 12.00. This confirms that the PS4 has been successfully reverted. Let's go ahead and select Update from USB Storage Device. As you can see, the PS4 is now asking for firmware version 11.00, which matches the version it had before the update. This means the revert using the legitimate Core OS patch method was successful. Now all that's left is to install firmware version 11.00. If you're updating through safe mode like I am, you can use the retail version of the firmware. If you're updating from the normal boot menu, then you'll need the recovery version. In this case, I'll go ahead and install the retail version of firmware 11.00 since I already have it. Plug in the flash drive and proceed with the firmware update just like before. Wait for the update to finish, and the PS4 will reboot normally. Once the system is back on, check the firmware version. And as you can see, the PS4 Fat is now running firmware version 11.00 again. That means we've successfully reverted the firmware. Alright, that's it for today's video. I hope this tutorial helped you understand how to revert the firmware on a PS4 using the legitimate Core OS patch method. As you can see, this method is much more reliable and time-efficient compared to the Core OS slot switching method, especially since it eliminates the need to guess the switch pattern and reflash the NOR chip over and over again. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.